Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wind Down Wednesdays. I'm your host, Paula Taylor, and this is episode 189. So, if you've been missing the full length episodes, it's been, I believe, 3 weeks since I posted a full length episode. You've been missing a couple of really good bonus episodes that were posted only for members of the Spiritual Awakening Sanctuary. So, if you want more episodes, if you want to access the meditations and activations that accompany each episode, you can join the Spiritual Awakening Sanctuary. It's only $11 a month, and there is a link in the show notes helping you get to the right place to do that. So today, I'm finally doing this long-awaited show that I've been talking about, What's the Deal with Energy Vampires? And it's interesting because I kept putting it off just because there were other things that sort of came up, and the energy's been really intense. I did a couple of bonus episodes to kind of help the people in my community deal with this energy, work with all of these intense influxes of energy that have been coming in. And I thought I was just kind of putting it off till I was ready or till there was like space for it. And then I realized this week that it was one of those topics that I needed a little bit more of a nuanced understanding of before I talked about it publicly. And that has come over the last like week and a half or so. It's always interesting how when I trust timing and I trust these, sometimes I get sort of the intuition not to do something, and I have to sometimes figure out if I'm procrastinating or if like there's a reason for it. And sometimes that's a nuanced process of trying to figure that out. So we're going to talk in general, like what are energy vampires? What does that mean? We're going to talk about kind of the basics and the general idea. And then I'm going to go into a little bit of like more nuance about that and tell a little bit of a story about that. And this is a story that I was like debating about whether to tell this publicly and how I wanted to talk about it. And so it might be a little more vague than you're used to from me. And that is intentional. I have to be careful when I'm talking. I was talking to my dad right before I got on. And I was like, I talk a lot about my dad. He's no longer in the physical plane. So there's no I like what I was going to say is like I have permission to talk about my dad. And he's like, did you, like when you first started talking about me, did you have permission? And I'm like, well, I feel like when people are no longer in the physical plane, they're not going to be triggered in the same way sometimes when you're telling a story that involves a specific person. And also he kind of laughed and he's like, yes, now you have permission now. So maybe it's a little bit retroactive there, but anyway, so if I'm a little bit vague about things, that's why today, but the point will come across. And this is a powerful story, and it ties back to a couple of these other episodes we've done talking about these kind of so-called darker or more shadowy energies. Denser energies is the word I prefer. So I can't talk about what an energy vampire is without mentioning what we do in the shadows. So there was a movie originally, and now there's a show. Actually, the show just ended. It's on Hulu, What We Do in the Shadows. And it's the show about essentially like a documentary. Film crew is following these vampires around. And one of the vampires, Colin Robinson, is an energy vampire. And it's great. It's like it's very funny, but also kind of accurate. So if you want to like interact with that more, it's definitely like a not safe for work and children type show, but it's a pretty amazingly well-written show and really funny and just also kind of thoughtful, especially around energy vampires. So I just wanted to mention that. So what's an energy vampire? Let's talk about this. And I realized, again, there's sort of a general definition, and then there's like nuance around this. So let's start with the general definition. So essentially, we are all spiritual beings, and we all require spiritual nourishment, spiritual food. And what we're supposed to do, like when we're in alignment with our own spirituality and sort of the source of our being, is that we feed ourselves through spiritual practice. And what happens with energy vampires is essentially, like very simplified, most of them don't know how to feed themselves spiritually. And so they are attempting to feed their spiritual nourishment needs through using the energy of another person. And that is not what we are intended to do. We exchange energy sometimes, and that can be very spiritually nourishing. But essentially, we need our own practice of spiritual nourishment. And the really easy analogy that comes to me here is like actual literal food. Like you are responsible for feeding yourself at a certain point. And this is where this gets like, even now with this analogy, I'm realizing like when you are young, when you are completely helpless, you are dependent on someone else to feed you. But part of their job is to help you learn how to feed yourself. Eventually, you're going to be an adult on your own. You're going to have to get your own meals. You're going to have to learn how to feed yourself. And we do sometimes, somebody will cook for you and feed you. And it's like a love offering, or we go someplace and we contract and we eat at a restaurant and we pay, we exchange energy in order to be nourished and fed in that way. But ultimately, you are responsible for your own nourishment as an adult. The same thing is true spiritually. And again, this is a very simplified explanation, but I find it really useful because it's the base of this, it's the foundation of this. Energy vampires are people who attempt to spiritually nourish themselves by using the energy of other people. And my experience with energy vampires is that a lot of times this is not a conscious process. It sometimes is. We'll talk a little bit more about that. It's also not always an intentional process. So there's a nuanced difference even there that's important. Sometimes we don't know that we're doing something, so it's unconscious. It's like below the level of our conscious mind, but it's also intentional. There's some part of us that knows that we need this. And so there is an intention behind this, whether it's acknowledged or not. It may be like a subconscious or an unconscious intention. Sometimes we are doing something unconsciously and unintentionally. Like we don't really know at a deeper level, like there's no intention behind it. We're just kind of trying to survive. And I see this sometimes with energy vampires. So these are people who have never figured out how to spiritually nourish themselves through a direct relationship with source energy, chi, ki, prana, source, God, whatever words you want to use for that. And so they are attempting to nourish themselves by co-opting, by using other people's energy. And there are all versions of these types of people. There are people who are absolutely doing this consciously and with intent. They know what they're doing and they're doing it intentionally. There are people who are unconscious. They don't realize they're doing it, but at some level they're absolutely doing it intentionally. And then there are people who are unconscious and unintentional. They're just desperate. It's that idea of, I'm thinking of Les Miserables, and this idea that Jean Valjean like steals a loaf of bread to try to feed his family. Like that was a conscious act in his case, but he's so desperate to survive, it's not necessarily intentional. Like he's not trying to hurt the shop owner. He's just like, I really need this food and I'm going to take it. And actually the way it's described in the story, I think it's like a spur of the moment thing. So it's not necessarily even conscious. It's just like, I'm so hungry. I grabbed the bread I didn't realize, and I just started eating it and brought it back to my family. So that's kind of the way that this pattern presents in people. Now, beyond that, there's a huge there's a huge breadth of like ways that this presents in people. So when you are with someone, and usually this is consistent. It's not just like one time. Every once in a while, all of us have days, again, where we are just depleted and we're looking to fill that depletion in like the easiest way possible. And so it happens. Like sometimes, you meet up with your friend and like they're having a really hard time. And at the end of that, you're like, man, that was really depleting. That is like and sometimes you're even like consciously or intentionally like giving them energy because they really need it, but you end up feeling depleted. So that's how you know that somebody's been kind of using your energy to try to nourish themselves. And again, sometimes it's not conscious or intentional. Sometimes it's not even a pattern. When it is a pattern, that's what we are calling something like an energy vampire. So this is someone that is doing this repeatedly. And these are people that when you are around them, you always feel depleted. And sometimes you don't know why. This is the insidiousness of this energy. You're like, man, whenever I hang out with Joe, I don't know anyone. I mean, I probably do know someone named Joe, but not a specific person, just picked a name. When I hang out with Joe, I just feel like tired. No matter what we're doing, I just feel tired. I come back, I feel really depleted. I came in with like feeling like buoyant and sort of joyful and having in a good mood essentially. And when I come back, I feel really depleted or tired or I'm cranky. And that those are kind of the red flags to look for. Like when I'm around this person, it feels really depleting. I feel really tired. Now the interesting thing is that the way that energy vampires essentially like feed on your energy is very it's varied. It's very varied. There's a lot of different ways this presents. So sometimes it's just being in the person's presence, and they've essentially, again, unintentionally or intentionally, probably not consciously, a lot of the times they've set up this pattern where they're just pulling your energy in. They're just desperate for energy and they're pulling it in. Sometimes there's no physical demonstration of this other than like every time I'm around that person, I feel exhausted, I feel drained, I feel depleted. And it's because literally energetically you are being drained or depleted. That's where the term, it's like a vampire draining blood, where they're draining energy. There are also sort of patterns of behavior. That's what I love about what we do in the shadows, is they show all these different ways that Colin Robinson, the energy vampire, uses to drain people's energy. So nonstop sort of talking, just like talking at people, not talking with people, but talking at people, talking about things that are really boring. Like those are ways that like in the show and in real life, again, this is like a that's why this is so funny, because it feels really true. It's sort of caricaturized and made into this humorous thing, but it's partly why it works is because there's definitely elements of truth here. So sometimes just talking at you, talking about things that are like he will intentionally in the show like bore people and feed off their boredom. And it's so funny because you'll see, the people would just start to do this, and they're sort of bending over, and their heads are nodding and they're falling asleep. Eventually they're like laying on the table. And this in the show, of course, this is completely conscious and intentional. Like he knows he's an energy vampire. He knows that he's feeding off that, and he's doing it just like the physical vampires are feeding off blood. Sometimes it's in like refusing to interact. So like if you're carrying the conversation and you always feel like you're carrying like the emotional load of the relationship, like I'm always the one like giving, I'm always the one giving, I'm always the one listening, I'm always the one talking, I'm always the one this. It's like when there's an imbalance, because here's the thing, in a healthy relationship, we go back and forth. Sometimes we receive, sometimes we give, and sometimes there are sort of patterns. And again, they're not necessarily intentional or even conscious. There's also like transactional relationships where like people pay me to hold space for them energetically. And it's expected that I am giving in that space because they are giving in return. They are giving the energetic exchange of paying me money. So we do have transactional relationships where, there's an understanding that you're receiving, but usually there's an expectation that you're giving something in response. And in most relationships, there's sort of an ebb and flow of this. It's when this gets really imbalanced and you start realizing that this person is always taking, always taking, always taking. You're always feeling depleted. You're always feeling tired. You're always feeling drained. That's when you can start to say, like, I wonder if this person is an energetic vampire. And what I want to say about this, I want to give some compassion for this, not permission, just compassion. My experience with I've been working with energy consciously since I was about 19 years old. So I have like almost 30 years now of experience, and professionally over 20 years of working with people, of hearing people's stories, of recognizing patterns in my life and other people's lives. My experience with a lot of energy vampires is that they're not malicious. They just don't understand how to feed themselves. It's like this idea of like, teach a man to fish and he can eat for a lifetime, give him a fish and he only eats for a day. So they don't know how to fish. They don't know how to feed themselves. They don't know how to connect to that source energy to replenish themselves, whatever way that looks like. And that's the other thing. There's some self-awareness here. And a lot of times energy vampires and sort of narcissism go hand in hand. And one of the key components of narcissism is like not doing any self-reflection, not having any real self-awareness. Because in order to learn how to feed yourself energetically, you have to know what feeds you. So like some people are fed energetically, spiritually by being in nature. I mean, that's pretty universal. Not some people, most of us, but some people more than others. Some people are fed like we use the term introvert and extrovert. Some people are fed energetically by having alone time, by having some separation, by not having energies around them. Typically, people who are sensitive and empathic sometimes feel that way. Some people are fed by being around people. Some people really get fed by like being in a crowd, by going to an event, by being, in conversation with people. And these are not like black and white places. Most of us sort of live back and forth and in between some of these places. But in order to understand how to feed yourself spiritually, you have to have enough self awareness, enough self understanding to know, like, what is it that I need? How am I going to get it? And you have to take responsibility and accountability for feeding yourself spiritually. You have to be able to say, like, I'd really love to come to this event, but I'm just not in a space right now where that's going to serve me. It's things like that. So there's boundary issues here too. And a lot of times the people who get taken advantage of or fed on by energetic vampires are people who have a hard time with boundaries, or people with a fawn response. So when we're talking about sympathetic nervous system responses, the fawn response is the people pleasing response. It's the like, I will give you what I want so you don't hurt me response. I will make myself small so you can be big. All of those things are it's sort of like a flashing neon sign, especially for people who are intentionally and perhaps consciously, but definitely intentionally looking for energy to feed on. And that's why sort of narcissists end up with empaths a lot, because they are looking for that sort of rich nourishment, and the empath is willing to give it away a lot of times. And unfortunately, this comes usually for both parties in this interaction. It's a survival mechanism. And so that's why I want to like present this with a little bit of compassion. So people who are feeding energy vampires, they just, most of them, not all of them, we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get into the nuance, but just generally, these are people who are just hungry and they're looking for food and they don't know how to feed themselves. And so they are looking for someone else who will feed them. And a lot of times, just as unconsciously and possibly unintentionally, or possibly intentionally just due to your own internal programming, the people who choose to feed energy vampires get into those relationships because it's a dynamic that they understand. I know what is expected here. I have to just give and give and give and give and give. And I'm going to feel depleted and I'm going to be sick, I'm going to end up with perhaps a chronic illness. And like, that's just all I've ever known. So in order to, like sometimes people are like, how do I deal with energetic vampires? And like, there's a kind of there's an aspect of this that requires internal dismantling, because especially if you keep attracting energetic vampires, it's because energetically you are open to this imbalanced relationship of I give and give and give and give, and the other person takes and takes and takes and takes. And the extreme form of this, is that you can actually be depleted to the point where you're sort of, again, chronically ill, or something like that, like even worse. Like this can be something that where one person is drained over time to the point where they just can't really even function anymore. And a lot of times, it's a little more nuanced than that, because it's kind of like if you think about a virus. If a virus is too good at killing its host, it doesn't have the opportunity to replicate. The virus's whole point is to replicate and usually spread. So if an energy vampire completely drains their host, then their source of food is gone. And sometimes that will happen and then they will move on to another relationship. But a lot of times it's sort of this idea of like in actual vampire, like physical vampire lore, or books, fiction, the vampire will feed like just enough to kind of sustain themselves. And again, that could actually be it could be a consensual relationship. It's hard to think of it that way because there's always going to be a power differential there. So in order to, like, if you're someone who's like, I keep attracting these energy vampires, there's something inside yourself that you need to look at. And as you shift that, not only, first of all, you'll recognize it sooner when someone shows up and have the courage to disengage earlier in the relationship, because once you get pulled into a relationship with an energy vampire, it can be really difficult to get out. I mean, there's a reason we're using the term vampire. Like in again physical vampire sort of lore, the vampire has the power to hypnotize you. The vampire has the power to convince you that everything's okay. The vampire has the power to feed on you and actually drain your life force, and you are enjoying it. This is kind of why I think the term energy or energetic vampire has come about, because there's a lot of those elements at play there, where at a certain point, you've let this sort of energy so far into your system that you're kind of stuck. And again, there's a lot of internal dismantling that has to come about, including recognizing the dynamic of the relationship. So that's kind of generally what my view, at least, on like what an energy vampire is and like where they come from and why they happen. And again, the energy vampire themselves typically has also something like childhood programming, childhood trauma, probably, past life karma, even, ancestral karma that sort of has set them up. It's sort of like eat or get eaten. So like for some people, if my choice is eat or get eaten, I'm going to choose eat. I'm going to choose the like aggressive sort of pattern of the survival pattern, but it's still a trauma response. It's almost like two sides of the same coin, which is why sometimes like narcissists and empaths are attracted to each other, or, whatever words you want to use. So that's kind of originally, I'm like, that's the show. And then, of course, it's not the show because there's much more nuance to that. I mean, we could talk about this forever, but I want to talk about this in terms of sort of some of the other things we've talked about, like lizard energy and trickster energy. And the way this came through is kind of this like sort of the one that came through last night is like birds. So all robins are birds. Like all robins are a type of bird, but not all birds are robins. So there are some other energies that are essentially kind of types of energetic vampires. So energetic vampire is like the big umbrella. That's like the bird sort of umbrella. And then under that, there are sort of types of energetic vampires. So we talked about lizard energy, and I talked about how lizards are trying to feed off of light. They're trying to consume the light because they can't find their own light. They desperately want the light, but they don't know how to find it in themselves. And so they're trying to consume it. That is a form of energetic vampirism. Trickster energy, which we're going to get into a little more, is a lot more nuanced and a lot more insidious. And it's like a special type of energy vampire. They are trying to get into your system just like an energy vampire does. They're looking for like an opening to kind of feed off of you. But trickster energy is not just wanting to feed. A lot of times tricksters are actually using your energy consciously, intentionally, to further their own ego desires. So they're not just feeding, like a lot of energy vampires that I've encountered are just like, I'm hungry and I don't know how to feed myself. I'm going to feed myself off of you. Trickster energy is much more insidious than that. It is like, I am going to take your energy, I'm going to take your light, and I'm going to project it as my own, or I'm going to use it to like make something. It's not just about consumption like lizard energy. That's a lot more straightforward. It's more about like, I'm going to take this energy and I'm going to use it in some way. So now it's story time. And again, this may be a little vaguer than I usually am, and it's intentional, but I think this really illustrates this well. And again, this is why I had to wait to do this episode until like all of these pieces had fallen into place. So you can go back and listen to what's the deal with lizard energy, what's the deal with trickster energy. There's a long story about this sort of trickster energy that I've been dealing with since my first human lifetime, my karmic seed, my very first human lifetime. This trickster energy came in and tricked this woman who was a medicine woman in Peru. And I talk about that in depth in that episode. So throughout my human lifetimes, these other differentiations of myself have been enthralled to this trickster energy for millennia, like thousands of years, I think. And I've been talking about, like in this lifetime, kind of dealing with that, but I hadn't really talked about like how this presented exactly in this lifetime and like how it came in. I talked about some ancestral stuff, but I haven't talked about like this actual lifetime for me. So um this trickster energy, I mean, it was sort of, this contract has been in place. You can think of it as a contract. Again, it's sort of like this version of me let this energy in, and until somebody has the courage to like do the internal dismantling and say no more and like kick the energy out and break the contract, end the contract, whatever, it's just been using me for lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. And I was in a session the other day, that I keep thinking I'm done dealing with this trickster energy, and then more of it comes out. It is very insidious. And essentially, what came through in this session I had the other day was I was looking at my like young adulthood years, and I've been seemingly separate from this. I've been dealing with what I believe is chronic Epstein-Barr virus, for almost 30 years now, for a long time. And this is something that came in when I was like in my young adulthood time, and never really left. That's kind of how trickster energy is. And I think chronic illness and trickster energy are really can be really closely tied. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the physical and the energetic here, just to kind of give you an understanding of how this showed up for me. So, this is something that I was officially diagnosed with at a time. I actually had an official relapse at a time. And then, I've just been struggling with chronic fatigue essentially ever since I had this. And we know, like scientifically, that Epstein Barr sort of like stays in the system and it can get reactivated. And it's also linked to other things, like now they've linked it to kind of Parkinson's and certain types of cancer. So it's a very insidious sort of energy. And it's a smart virus. So it will sort of stay dormant, and it's kind of like biding its time. And then when it sees an opening, it will like flare up. And what happened to me recently is that I went to Cozumel, and I've been working with somebody on like the physical aspect of like trying to clear this energy from my system. And through that process, and then being in this heat in Cozumel, I had a flare up of this. I'm going to call it EBV, Epstein Barr, because I don't want to keep saying Epstein Barr, EBV. And I talked about it and I showed it on social media, and I had this outbreak of dyshydrotic eczema in my hands. Never had that before. It was really scary and it freaked me out. There was so much heat coming through my body. I was also being offered this energetic activation. And this is where this stuff gets so nuanced and so tricky. And this is why I will always go to the energy source, because the energy is the source, in my opinion. So I was also being offered this energetic upgrade, and so I had all this heat coming through. I'm pretty sure I probably had a fever. I never tested, physically to find that out. I thought all of this was part of this activation that was trying to come through, and eventually, what I realized through this session, with a practitioner, was that this was tied to this activation is coming through, and it wants a clear slate. It wants me to clear this EBV fully from my system, and there was like this struggle going on in the physical and in the energetic. So in the energetic, we linked it to this trickster energy, and I started looking at this version, this life, my differentiation, like where this had come in, how it had come in, like what kind of relationships I was in when this came in, and I was able to kind of pinpoint where it had shown up in this life. And to our credit, me and the other person in this relationship, I believe that we made a karmic contract to clear this life. I believe this other person, who is not actively doing this like I am, but I believe like there's some sort of like there was an agreement, and probably, in the power differential of the relationship, I was like, yes, I will do all the work. And also, I am here to reclaim my power in this lifetime as a being of source, as an angelic being, as a powerful healer, as a medicine woman, as a shaman, woman, anyway, whatever, all of the things. And in order to do that, I had to get rid of this trickster energy. I had to break my addiction, my contract with this trickster energy. So in this session, we were looking at all of this stuff, and I was realizing all of these things, and it just like, this is where it's so insidious, because when you're in a relationship with this trickster energy that's showing up in the form of a person, this is a very specified type of energetic vampire. And this energy not only convinces you that you want to be there, that you want to give your energy, it convinces you that you really are less than you actually are. And so you don't try to claim your power back, because your power, you are willingly on some level, probably not consciously and barely intentionally, because some version of you long long ago made this agreement, at least in my case, like I'm not the one who made this agreement, another version of my soul made this agreement. You are so stuck in this pattern that you don't even recognize that it is hurting you, even though there are physical signs that it is hurting you. Like I never connected the EBV with this sort of trickstery relationship that happened many, many years ago, as you know, when I was much, much younger, until like 10 days ago or something. Uh, I don't know how long ago, like in the last couple of weeks. And when I started to see this, this is also, again, why it's so important to have someone else to hold space for you sometimes in that contracted way, because there is no way I could have seen all of this myself. And even as she was trying to help me release it, I was like making excuses for it and saying, oh, I don't want to do that, and oh, I don't want to do that, and that doesn't feel very loving, until I finally like really saw how dark and insidious and harmful this energy was. So this trickster energy has been co-opting my energy for years in this life, for millennia in my like soul's lifetime, and using it for their own gain, using it to for their own false ego power, essentially, to project this image of power, to project this image of success. Um, and when I finally saw that, there's a lot of swearing in that session, which I try to keep the podcast clean, but I kind of have a potty mouth. Thanks, Dad. Speaking of my dad, he's laughing. Sorry. He was very creative about using swear words, and I have definitely inherited that. And it's a really good way to move energy. I mean, especially when you are trying to get in touch with like enough anger to clear something that's really insidious like this, like some nice big F bombs can really help with that. So there's a lot of those in this session. And this affirmation that has like come through in my work with this person before about like F off Trickster. And like when I cleared my house afterwards, I was running through my house with the sage yelling F off Trickster, sort of gleefully and enjoying it and feeling the energy leave. So trickster energy is a specific type of energetic vampiric energy that is very sneaky and insidious and hard to get rid of, and sort of energy that a lot of times we're going to need help with. We're going to need help seeing it. We're going to need help seeing the extent to which it has like sort of made its way into our system, the extent to which we're agreeing to feed this. Like if you'd asked me, I'd been like, oh no, I banished that trickster energy and I'm not feeding it at all. Consciously, I was not. But on some level, a huge amount of my energy was going into this trickster situation. And the result of that was that I did not have the energy to clear the EBV. Some people get Epstein-Barr. Most people get Epstein-Barr when they're kids. Sometimes we call it mono when kids are younger. Almost everybody gets Epstein-Barr, and most people sort of clear it from their system. And like it may be dormant, but it never flares back up. It doesn't cause problems. It doesn't like take advantage of weakness. That's what the virus does too. It's very trickstery. Epstein-Barr virus is a trickster virus. A lot of chronic illnesses have this trickstery energy where and I have this long-standing pattern, and I've talked about this on the show before, of sort of like starting to claim that power and getting into a space where I feel like I have momentum, and then like running into the wall and sliding down the wall is the way that I've talked about it in the past. And I realize that this is part of that pattern, that anytime I started to really reclaim that power, to reclaim that energy, to start reclaiming my health and vitality, that trickster energy was there to kind of convince me that it wasn't a good thing. The EBV would flare up and I'd say, oh yeah, no, I'll stay in my place. That's kind of like the feeling of this is like, know your place. And when you start getting too expanded, when you start thinking too much of yourself, I'm going to smack you back down a couple levels. usually with some sort of a physical outbreak, like this thing that happened with my hands. I think because this energy, both the viral energy and the trickster energy that are very entwined in my system. I'm not saying this is the case for everyone, but in my system, these things were very entwined. It felt threatened because it could see that if I could get through this and not be afraid and not knock myself back down, that I had now the ability to open up to this next activation that can clear this fully from my system. And so it gave me one of the scariest symptoms that it could think of, which was something involving my hands, because I work with my hands for a living. I and interestingly, just because there's always a design even to these things. Sorry, I just started hearing light language like in 6 different places around my head, which is a confirmation. One of the things I'm being called to do in my work is move more into the virtual space. And this was also part of that. So there's a grander design to this of like, if I can't work with my hands physically on a person, how do I work with this energy? And do I even need my hands? And do I need somebody lying on a table in front of me? Or can I do this from anywhere with anyone? And the answer is yes. Yes, and the answer is always yes, and because we're in the 5D, right? Like, yes, and being on a table is very important when sometimes we need to actually have physical touch. And in the virtual, sometimes we can move something so much in the energetic that the physical will just naturally follow. So again, more nuance. Yay, happy 5D consciousness. It's all about the gray. It's all about the nuance. And it's all about understanding that this soul and I, who have been in this pattern for thousands of years, hundreds of years, this trickster energy that I've been in a relationship with for thousands of years, it could not have made it into my system not my system, but my soul system, this medicine woman in Peru, but my soul system here too. It could not have made it into my system without some permission on my part. Unconscious, but intentional. That's that thing. Like on some level, when I was presented with this, I could have said no to it. I can actually see the moment when I could have said no to this energy coming in. And I did not. I allowed it in by allowing the relationship with the person, with the soul that like brought this into my space. And I would not be the person sitting here who does what I do with the knowledge and the awareness that I have if I hadn't gone through that. So there's also that aspect of it, is like I'm hearing Alanis Morissette, you live, you learn. Anyway, you live and you learn. And part of that process is sometimes having to get really uncomfortable and having to see some really difficult truths. When I was being asked to release this energy, the same thing happened. I talked about this with the ancestral energy. This woman came and she presented herself as a loving grandmother figure, and so I let her in. And then it took months to recognize that and the help of someone else, and then like more time, probably more months to get it out. This is something that's been around for years of this life and millennia. So this is very insidious energy, and it's something that I have like an early warning system now, and I look at that system every day and I go, okay, where is this energy trying to get back in? It's not a question of is it trying to get back in, it's like where is it trying to get back in, and how do I keep saying no to it? Because until I have essentially altered my frequency to where we are no longer, my frequency and this trickster energy has been in some sort of coherence, or the frequency would not be able to exist in my system. So as I change my frequency, anytime we change, there's this sort of back and forth pattern, right? Like we're in the new frequency and we're kind of in the old frequency, and we're in the new frequency. So as we're in this shift, everybody's in a shift right now into a new frequency, an invitation into a new frequency. There is always, it's the most dangerous part of the shift. It's the part where a lot of people give up. Sometimes not the hardest work of the initial release, it's what comes after. It's that liminal period. A long time ago in a show, I talked about this idea of sort of renovating your house as an analogy. So I want space. I want one big space. I don't want a wall between my living room and my kitchen anymore. That's what I want. And I'm going to knock it down, and I'm going to get the sledgehammer out, and I've knocked it all down. That's the like initial hardest part of this work. And then I'm looking around and I'm like, holy crap, what did I do? This space feels so different. I'm not sure I like it. There's dust everywhere. It's dirty. This is the most dangerous part of the process in terms of this is the place where people give up. When I had that huge flare up with the EBV, with the which I am connecting this thing in my hands to the EBV. I know it's connected. Um, I laid on the couch for 4 days and was like, okay, I give up. And that's okay. It's okay to be in that space. And then I realized, like, I'm not staying there. I can't stay in the house with no wall that doesn't have drywall up where the dust is everywhere. I literally did not have the energy to get up and like clean the dust out, like physically and energetically. And I knew that I would at some point if I could just hang on in the liminal, if I could hang on in that really uncomfortable place. I could have just been like, okay, I give up, and my hands would have stopped flaring up, and I would have been back in this pattern of like chronic fatigue, chronic illness, like up and down. And I'm not out of it yet. I mean, again, it's still, this is a process. But what I chose was, when I had the energy to choose it again, I chose to figure out what it was, because all of that happened before I knew what this was, by going to see this practitioner and like allowing this information in. And now I'm working with this consciously and intentionally. That's the most powerful way to work with energy, consciously and intentionally. And the energy that's coming back, the trickster energy in this lifetime, is being worked with intentionally, but not consciously. So as long as I keep working with it consciously and I hold my intention up, like, it might be a longer like war, but I've already won. The battles, like, I lost one battle with the hands and the resting, and then I was like, nope, I'm bringing myself back into battle. And battle sounds like a very adversarial word, but it's actually appropriate with trickster energy. It is a battle. It will convince you that everything is okay and there's nothing you can do and you have done everything you can do. And it's not true. It's never true. It's never true. We never reach the end of this expansion journey. And there was a time, and like, and I get that people say this to me a lot sometimes too, and it's like, oh, really? Like, I'm so tired. That's appropriate. And when that's coming up, like, you can take a break. I took a break. I laid around for 4 days because I couldn't use my hand, and I just felt like garbage. The fatigue was so bad, I could not get off the couch for like 4 days. And when I had enough reserves built back up energetically, when I had fed myself energetically enough to like go back into the next skirmish, then I really saw the truth. And now the war is already over. I just have to keep fighting the battles that lead to the full end of the war. I have to understand, now I'm hearing Rome wasn't built in a day. Like, this is something that's been in my soul's karmic pattern for thousands of years. It is not going to clear in like a day. And I have to remind myself that, because that's part of the insidiousness of the energy, is that like, oh yeah, you've done the work, you're done, you're fine. You've reached the most you can reach. And now I love the fact that this will never end, because in the middle of this, I got this huge, amazing Syrian activation. That's the blue energy that will come in and contain and eventually put out the EBV fire, so that the angelic fire is what remains. And it's interesting elementally when we're working with these things, because the EBV fire is a fire that will burn me out from the inside and take my energy. The angelic fire is fire that will fuel me. And so there's so much nuance in this. And so just briefly, before I kind of wrap up, how do we work with this energy of the energetic vampire? The easiest, cleanest thing to do is disengage. If you can completely disengage, sometimes it takes some time, sometimes it hurts some feelings, but if you can completely disengage, then that energy is not in your field anymore. You've completely disengaged. that is not, it's not always that simple, right? We don't have a lot of black and white options. Sometimes we do now, and like sometimes it's refreshing, like, nope, no thank you, not today, Satan, like literally, nope, no thank you. And sometimes it's like, this is someone that's going to be in your life. It's somebody that it's somebody that's in your life whether you want them to be or not. And there's not a clean way to kind of like break that. That is when cord work is really helpful. So if you read my book, Spiritual Integration, I talk about cord work and using a mirror. I don't use a mirror almost at all anymore, except with energetic vampires. It is sometimes the only way to get that energy out of your field because it can be so insidious. So when you're doing cord work, you can read all about it in the book, but here's just like a really brief sort of overview. It's only appropriate to work on your side of the cord. So imagine like you have a relationship with somebody and there's a cord between the two of you energetically. This cord has a life of itself. When people come through and sever cords and pull cords, most of the time, like 90% of the time, that doesn't work because the cord has its own life force. And so the way I work with cords is that somewhere around the center of the cord, there's the place where your energy and the other person's energy meet, and you can place things in this part of the cord and then work on your part of the cord, and you can effectively block their energy from your field even if you can't physically remove this person from your life. So a big thick old cinder block wall, I used that with a client the other day, super effective. That worked really well. And this person just wanted no contact between their side of the cord and the other side of the cord. If you're still feeling kind of like attacked or the person's really pulling on you, like that's the only time when I'm like out of other options, that's when I will put up a mirror, because the mirror will bounce back their energy to them. And here's the thing, the energy you give out automatically comes back to you threefold, is the Wiccan way. It's sometimes I think it's more. You don't need to put up a mirror for this person to get the karma that they're going to get from this situation. It's going to come. It may not be in this lifetime, which can be really frustrating as a dumb human brain, as my friend would say, but it is coming back to them. You don't need to aid in that process by putting a mirror up. However, and there's the 5D, sometimes it's the only way, even that thick wall, like the energy's getting through. So putting a mirror up reflects the energy back at them that they are trying to like use to sort of pull you back in, because they're feeding off you, but they're sending energy to do that. They're putting like a hook into your field to pull energy back to them. So this will block the hook and it will sort of distract them with their own energy so that you have more time to work on your cord, and eventually hopefully the cord does, like on its own, it sort of dissolves or goes away, or you just leave that in there. The loving way to do this, especially if you're working with somebody who's like not intentional or conscious about this, I like to use a satellite dish. So the satellite dish collects all of the energy that they're trying to use to pull you in, and then it beams back love. And the satellite dish itself does this. So this is not my energy. I put the dish in there, I create it, and then it beams love to the person. Sometimes people aren't in a space to have that much compassion, and I understand that, but like karmically, that's the most loving option, because again, that person, everybody has to deal with their karma at a certain point. In my case, it's taken thousands of years for my soul, for my differentiation, me, Paula Schlax Taylor, to be able to deal with this karmic pattern that my soul has been carrying for thousands of years. But I'm dealing with it, and I have to deal with it. I mean, I feel like I don't have a choice. I don't have to. I choose to deal with it. And like any of those other lifetimes, if there was a relationship where someone was like, man, I really wish this karma was getting dealt with, like it is now, but it might be 600 years after they wanted it to be. Cosmically, time doesn't really exist. So when you're trying to, like, if you're really like, sometimes I work with people and they're like, I really want this person to like get what's coming to them. And like, that's not a loving space to be in. And I understand it. Sometimes I am too far on the loving side and then I'm still getting taken advantage of. So there's nuance there as well. But cord work is a really good way to kind of work with energy vampires to kind of keep their energy out of your field, to keep them from pulling you back in. You can read more about that in the book, or you can always reach out for a one-on-one session to work with that directly. So again, if you're enjoying the show, if you missed the weeks that I took off and you were hoping that there was going to be a show, if you join us in the Spiritual Awakening Sanctuary, almost weekly, there is a show or a bonus episode, and then there are meditations and guided activations that accompany each episode where I walk you through working with some of the things that I talk about in the episode. It's $11 a month. You can go to paulataylorenergy.com and sign up for that. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a beautiful rest of your day or evening. I will see you on the next episode of Wind Down Wednesdays.